Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, the juice is loose after 9 years in prison following convictions for kidnapping and armed robbery. O.J. Simpson was granted parole by the state of Nevada.
My vote is to grant your parole effective when eligible.
I concur with Commissioner Korda and grant parole. And in addition, our decision, although difficult, is fair and just.
I concur with Commissioner Korda and agree to grant parole.
Mr. Simpson, I do vote to grant parole when eligible, and that will conclude this hearing.
Thank you.
Well, the decision came after a hearing where Simpson spoke at length about the 2007 robbery that put him in prison, while his daughter testified about wanting to spend time with her father again.
I've always thought I've been pretty good with people, and I've basically spent a conflict-free life. You know, I'm not a guy that ever got into fights on the street and with the public and everybody, but as I said, they give you a bunch of little tools about how to talk to people instead of fighting, instead of throwing punches. It's been ruled legally by the state of California that it was my property, and they've given it to me. I have it. I'm no danger to pull a gun on anybody. You know, I never have in my life. I've never been accused of it in my life. Nobody's ever accused me of pulling any weapon on them.
I don't feel that he's a threat, and I will make this clear to you. OJ never held a gun on me.
I think I made it clear back then, I've never had an alcohol problem. And if I took that alcohol course, it would have been more, you know, for my children, in case they ended up having a problem. Well, my kids don't have a problem. I don't think anybody's ever accused me of having an alcohol problem or any kind of substance problem.
On behalf of my family, my brother, my sister, an aunt, an uncle, his friends, we just want him to come home.
I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry to Nevada. I wish Ricio had never called me. I thought I was glad to get my stuff back, but it wasn't worth it. You know, 9 years away from your family is just not worth it, and I'm sorry.
So he's talking there about the 2007 robbery that put him away, but that's not why this is big news. We care because this guy murdered 2 people with a knife in 1995 and got off anyway. He was acquitted for the killing of his wife and her friend. Dr. Michael Baden is a forensic pathologist. He advised the Simpson defense team at that trial. Mark Furman is a former Los Angeles detective who investigated the murders, and they both join us tonight. Thanks a lot for coming on. Mark Furman, what do you make of what O.J. Simpson said today?
Well, Tucker, what's interesting is almost everything he said was either a partial lie or a lie. He beats women. He was actually prosecuted for beating Nicole, so he's been in several fights, but he beats up women. He had a weapon in the Bronco with AC Cowlings. He threatened to kill himself. He actually was partially probably holding AC Cowlings hostage in that situation. He actually told the 2 men in Las Vegas to bring guns. So he knew full well that they had guns and they were going to probably brandish them, if not more. The property that he says was his was all given back to the victim. And I know both of these facts because I talked to the very detective that handled this case today.
So, Doctor, when you see this, when you see O.J. Simpson finally a free man with no murder charges hanging over him because you helped get him acquitted, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think that what Mark Furman says, it was irrelevant to today's procedure that the parole board had said right out in front that whatever happened before the 2007 incident doesn't count in their deliberations, and that.
Well, sure. No, I mean, no one would contest that legally. It's not relevant legally, but let's exit the legal world and into the real world. I think most people would agree this guy committed a double murder and beat his wife and is kind of a horrible person. You helped get him off. So my question is, how do you feel about that?
I think that the 12 jurors didn't feel that the prosecution presented the case. Right. I was involved as a forensic pathologist who went over all the forensic evidence, which is independent of whether he did it or not. The evidence is the evidence. The jury felt that was presented to them in the criminal trial was not sufficient to find guilty. And then in the civil case, they heard evidence and presented better, and they convicted him. And I think that the parole comes about because he was a model prisoner. And it's interesting, Tucker, I spoke to the district attorney in Las Vegas, David Roger, who prosecuted the 2007 case. They had offered him 30 months plea deal, which he refused. He could have been in for 30 months, got out, and now it's 9 years later, and there's still problems, but he felt that as long as he abided by all of the procedures necessary for probation, that it was proper to give him probation.
Yeah, well, he's a man into denial. Mark Furman, I've talked to you before, but I've never asked you this question. I've always wondered. So here, O.J. Simpson, in my view, murders 2 people, gets away with it, and the trial ends, and you become the villain, and he goes to play golf. What do you think of that? Are you bitter about that?
Well, I really don't, and I never have worried about what suspects think or what they're doing, or if one slips away. I mean, that's just the way things work. There's
no, that's what I'm saying. I mean, in our society, I mean, you almost never hear anybody get on TV and say, O.J. Simpson's a murderer, and it's disgusting. I've heard many people say, that Mark Furman's a bad guy. And I just wonder if you think it's unfair that in the view of some, maybe many, you're the villain when this guy got away with murder.
Well, the first thing, Tucker, there is no such thing as fair. The world's not fair. And you you march on with the facts that you have before you, and the facts are, I'm not a murderer. So there is nothing you can call me that makes me an equal to just how evil O.J. Simpson is. I mean, when you cut the head off of your children's mother and you leave her on the steps, most probably, had we not found the body, the children would have wandered down there and found their mother in a pool of blood. When you think about that and you want to compare that to anything that you think I am, I'll take that challenge anytime.
Well, that's actually a pretty good point. So, Doctor, in today's hearing, you really got the sense that O.J. Simpson, and it looks sincere to me, didn't think he did anything wrong. And I remember having that same impression of him 22 years ago during his trial. Was that your impression? This is a guy who believes himself blameless?
No, he didn't. Doesn't believe himself blameless. He took some responsibility for the fact that the reason for the 2007 episodes was because he got people there. I was surprised that he tried to defend what happened there, but he did finally take some responsibility because a security guard that he didn't know pulled out the gun. But because of the rather insignificance of the stupid thing that he was doing, Mr. Rogers, the district attorney, Mr. Roger, was able to offer him a decent plea bargain, which he refused, and he wound up getting really punishment for the murder of his wife and at the time that
Ron Goldman. My last question. Do you think he did it, Doctor? I've never asked you this. Do you think he killed him?
I think that both juries got it right as far as what was presented to the juries.
Right. No, but do you think he did it? Do you think he killed him?
I keep myself any opinions I have about any cases I testify. I've never testified on an opinion of what I thought somebody was guilty or innocent. I'll testify as to what the forensic science shows, what the autopsy shows.
No, I get it. I'm not asking you to testify just to count for what you think, but I don't think I'm going to get anywhere.
That's right.
Doctor, thank you. Mark Furman, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Jeffrey Felix is a former correctional officer at Lovelock Correctional Center, where O.J. Simpson has been held for the past 9 years. He's the author of a book called Guarding the Juice, How O.J. Simpson Became My Prison BFF. Quite a title. And yet, during today's hearing, O.J. and his attorney appeared to ridicule Felix. Watch this.
I spent the 12 years leading up to this incident in Vegas raising 2 kids in L.A. In Miami. And, with all the media stuff, we got these guys like Jeffrey Felix making up stories and stuff. That was happening out on the street also.
Jeffrey Felix joins us now. So, this is really illustrative. We're learning that not only is he a violent killer, in my view, he's also kind of a bad friend. You say you're his BFF, and there he is slagging you in the hearing today. How'd you feel?
Yeah, I felt horrible. I mean, in my book, all I said was good things about the Jews. I said he was a model inmate. You know, he never broke any disciplinaries. He always followed rules and regulation. He treated people with respect. I didn't say anything bad about him in my book. You know, I get hammered on the streets for, you know, sticking up for the Jews. And he puts on, you know, he puts on the bus driver's uniform and it just runs me over. I mean, he threw my name out there. Over 500 million people heard that. I mean, that was horrible.
Are you assessing your own ability to judge character now? Are you thinking maybe he's not the double murderer I thought he was? Maybe he's a bad guy now?
I don't know. All I know is how I feel betrayed. I mean, all I did was stick up for him, and he ran me over. I mean, it's horrible.
I mean, let's be real. Were you really surprised that O.J. Simpson wasn't loyal to a prison guard?
Well, he doesn't have to throw my name out there. You know, okay, look, O.J. Simpson had one shot at freedom today to the parole board, and he took that chance and threw my name out there. I mean, that's taking a risk.
Why was he mad at you, do you think?
I have no idea. Maybe it's over the cookie story. He should be more angry, and his camp should be more angry about the story that came out about the lady pleasuring, or him pleasuring himself in front of the woman guard that never happened.
Now, I haven't read your book. It's on my nightstand, but, you know, long reading list. But apparently you've got a chapter describing his private parts, the whole chapter?
Yes, that was more my co-writer's idea. But, you know, after seeing him, I kind of felt inadequate about myself.
Okay. But without even getting into any more of those details, thank you very much, I wonder if maybe that's why he's annoyed.
Well, how can he be annoyed about that? That's a compliment. I mean, if you tell him, you know, he's not working with anything, that would be horrible.
Okay. I'm siding with OJ all of a sudden, Jeffrey, so we're going to have to cut the segment short. But thanks a lot for joining us.
Hey, no problem. You guys have a great night.
You too. Attorney General Jeff Sessions could be the president's best ally in the White House, so why did the president attack him in the New York Times? That's next. Also, Special Counsel Bob Mueller reportedly expanding his investigation in a huge way, bigly, to cover Donald Trump's business dealings. Charles Krauthammer will tell us what that might mean for this administration. Stay tuned. Well, it's been overshadowed by news about war heroes and retired tailbacks, but the president has been in the news today, too, as he often is. Last night, he went after his own Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, saying he was angry that Sessions had recused himself from the Russia investigation. If he had to do it over again, the president said, he would have hired someone else to be the AG. Stinging words, but this morning, Sessions seemed to brush them off.
Given what he said, what is your reaction to those remarks, and how seriously are you considering possibly resigning?
We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
How do you feel like you can effectively serve from here on out if you don't have the confidence of the president?
We're serving right now. I'm totally confident that we can continue to run this office in an effective way.
Now, take a step back and you can kind of see how this all happened. The president is a 71-year-old political novice, and all of a sudden he's the subject of a vague, open-ended federal investigation whose goal may be to imprison him and his family. Ask anyone who's had an independent counsel on his case, and there are a lot of them here in Washington, what that's like. It's terrifying. The pressure is soul distorting. You can wind up lashing out at the people around you, even, maybe especially, the ones trying to help you the most. So that's probably what's going on. And yet, attacking Jeff Sessions was still a useless, self-destructive act. The first rule in politics, as in war, as in life, don't shoot the friendlies. Sessions is the closest ally Trump has in this administration, one of the very few who even understands why the president won in the first place. Unlike most political appointees in Washington, Sessions made big sacrifices to work in this administration. A year ago, he was one of the most popular people in the state of Alabama. With a Senate seat he could have held forever. Many on his staff didn't want him to endorse Donald Trump, but he did anyway, purely because he felt it was important. Sessions was worried about what an unsecured border and mass immigration would do to America, even though the biggest effects from those wouldn't be seen until decades after he was long gone from this earth. So he jumped in and accepted Trump's offer to become Attorney General. He didn't do it to get rich, and certainly not to become more popular. He instantly became less. You'll remember that many of his former colleagues in the Senate slandered him as a bigot during his confirmation hearings. As Attorney General, Sessions has been the rare person in the entire executive branch making actual progress implementing the agenda his boss ran on, because he's the rare person who believes in it. In an administration brimming with opportunists and ideological saboteurs, people who literally couldn't be less interested in what voters think, Sessions has never lost sight of the lessons of the last election. He's gone after sanctuary cities, he's enforced immigration laws, he's ended the Obama administration's attacks on local police departments, and a lot more. He's likely the most effective member of the Trump cabinet. In return, the president attacked him in the failing New York Times. That's not just criticism, it's an insult. It's also a worrisome sign that the president may be forgetting who is on his side. Goldman Sachs did not elect Donald Trump. America's long-ignored middle class did. Trump voters may find his tweets about the media amusing and well-deserved, because obviously they are, but they're not the point of this exercise. The point is to shine some light on the broad middle of this country, on the millions of normal people who are hurting and who could badly use an ally in power for the first time in a long time. Now, the hope is that what happened yesterday was just a stress-related aberration, the political equivalent of yelling at your kids when you had a bad day at the office. If so, it will not be hard to fix this. Going forward, just pay a little less attention to the New York Times, pay a little more to Matt Drudge. And for God's sake, lay off Jeff Sessions. He is your friend, one of the very few you have in Washington. Brad Blakeman was an advisor on the Trump transition team, and he joins us in the studio. Brad, thanks a lot for coming on.
Pleasure.
So it's hard to understand why the president would lash. It's easy to understand the president's frustration with this independent counsel investigation, which is a real threat to him and to his presidency. It's hard to see why Jeff Sessions gets the blame, because I really think Sessions is one of the rare people who understands why Trump got elected.
There's no doubt that he is producing for the president. They're getting along in policy. They're not getting along in personality. And if we turn the clock back to the early part of June, when this recusal took place, Jeff Sessions knew that the president was disappointed, and he offered his resignation. The resignation was not accepted at the time. You would think that that would have blown over. There's nothing new that happened between June 6th and today, other than the president, again, lashes out at somebody who's delivering for him and the American people. It doesn't make sense at this time for the president to hurt somebody, and in fact, he's hurting himself, and he's hurting his own agenda by going after him.
And it's deeply unfair, but it also might be a sign of bad political judgment. And so I guess the macro question is, why would you care what the New York Times thinks of you? The New York Times hates him. Meanwhile, the Drudge Report, run by Matt Drudge, who's an aggregator, one of the biggest on the internet, is one of the reasons Trump got elected, I would argue. Was an early champion of Trump. Now, in the last couple of weeks, it seemed hostile to Trump. That would be an issue of real concern for me if I were running the Trump political operation. Losing people who supported me is a sign that things are going in the wrong direction. Do you think they know that?
I would hope they know that. And certainly the White House was not happy. This was reported in the last day of them being blindsided by this interview and then trying to do damage control. The president did a fantastic job on health care. He took the 52 senators to task and reminded them what their responsibility and promises were to the American people. That was all destroyed in a matter of hours by this interview. And by the way, you give an interview like that to the enemy, to the New York Times, who's no friend of yours, and who used the entire interview to bait you? That's what they were doing, and the president unfortunately took the bait, and now he's received the brunt of a terrible, terrible article, and it's now going to take some time for him to get back on track. But the president has to realize you can be frustrated, but you need to keep it within the family. Vent to your staff, but certainly don't vent to your enemies.
Well, I think within the context of an independent counsel investigation, the only people to whom you can vent are your lawyer and your spouse.
Absolutely.
They're the only people whose communications with you cannot be grabbed by the prosecutor. He must know this. I know a million people, as do you, who've been the subject of these things. They're really scary. They can send you to prison. Why has nobody told him that, or is he ignoring that?
Well, I think they are telling him that. He's got the finest lawyers. He's got a very brilliant staff. But if you don't take the advice, who can you blame? You have to blame yourself. And the president needs to be more disciplined, more controlled, because he's got an agenda that the American people are very acceptable of. They want Obamacare repealed and replaced. They want tax reform. They want immigration reform. These are the things that the president has to deliver on. Everything else is just noise. And he has the perfect out in not talking about it. There's a special counsel. There are investigations on the Hill.
Right.
He's got the perfect excuse not to talk.
It was sinister today to see that leaked from the Mueller camp. The president says they better not be going after my personal finances. Bam. less than 24 hours a leak? Yes, they are.
That's right. But again, he was baited into that question by the New York Times. And quite frankly, the president is right. The special counsel serves at the pleasure of the president as well.
The president is absolutely right.
But he better have a good reason to get rid of him.
Yeah,
if it comes to
I don't think that would work.
I don't think it'll work.
Brad Blakeman, thanks a lot for joining us.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it. Just one day after the president warned special counsel Robert Mueller not to investigate his finances in an interview with the New York Times, Mueller reportedly is doing just that and having his deputies spread the word that he's doing just that. Bloomberg reported this morning that Mueller is not just looking at links between Russia and Trump's presidential campaign, he's also investigating Trump's personal business dealings that may involve Russia, even tangentially. Those would include the 2013 Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. Meanwhile, about an hour ago, the Wall Street Journal reported that Mueller is also investigating former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort for possible money laundering. Charles Krauthammer is an author and columnist, and he joins us tonight. There's a lot here, but first to the timing of this. So the president says, I think unwisely, to the New York Times, Mueller can't go there with my personal finances, my family's business. The very next day, somebody from the Mueller camp leaks this. What do you think of that?
Look, I think the problem here at root is the whole idea of the special counsel, special prosecutor. Their mandates are essentially unlimited. Their resources are unlimited, and politically they're unfireable. Legally, yes, but we know what happened with Nixon when he tried to fire a special prosecutor, and I think the same would happen to Trump. He'd be engulfed if he tried to. And why does this happen? Because what it does, the reason it's wrong, is it creates an organization with unlimited resources and mandate to go on a fishing expedition. We know what happened with Clinton. It started out as a bad real estate deal and ended up with sex in the Oval Office. Not exactly two related topics.
No, it's not a linear progression.
No, it was a rather zigzag progression from one to the other. Look, I think if the mandate, let's assume, it's a given that we're having a special prosecutor, okay? He's there. The mandate is to look for the collusion, any cooperation. I think it is reasonable within the scope of that charge to look to follow the money, to see if there were financial dealings with Russia that might account for some of the collusion if they find collusion. What Trump seemed to say in the interview is he kind of accepted the logic of that. He wouldn't protest that. He seemed to say if you go beyond Russia transactions, then you're on a fishing expedition, then you cross the red line. So even Trump seems to be saying that as long as these are Russian transactions, which I assume are fairly limited, Trump himself mentioned the sale of condos, for example, to Russian nationals, which on its face completely innocent. So that seems to be where the dividing line is.
I think that's a big line, though. I mean, I'm confident until it's shown otherwise that Russia did not get Donald Trump elected. I don't think there's evidence of that. Right. Anytime you have any kind of financial transaction in Russia, whether it's buying dinner or selling a condo or having a Miss Universe pageant, I mean, who knows what's there? It's Russia.
And that's why I think looking at the finances is important. It's not a market economy like ours.
Exactly.
It's not one where you have public companies that have to make declarations on the stock market. This is a mafia regime run by thugs, ex-KGB thugs, and they launder money, they do deals, they steal. It's not to say that Trump had anything at all to do with any of that, but because those are the circumstances under which business is transacted in Russia, then you can link it logically. So again, if you accept the premise that we should have a special prosecutor, and you accept the scope to go after possible collusion, it makes sense to go after the financial dealings. But you shouldn't be in a fishing expedition to go after stuff he did with other countries, other places.
It sounds like that's where we are, and I think it could be really problematic, but why not? Charles, thank you for that.
My pleasure.
A satanic temple is trying to erect a shrine to the Prince of Darkness in a small Minnesota town. Welcome to 2017. What's the point of all this? We'll talk to the co-founder of the Satanic Temple in just a minute. He might explain. Well, a Veterans Park in Belle Plaine City, Minnesota once featured a small Christian monument. That was dangerous and offensive, of course. So there were lawsuit threats, and the city declared the monument's location a free speech zone. But that in turn drew the attention of a Satanist group, which wanted to erect a satanic shrine in the park. Now the city is reversing itself and has decided to remove all religious symbols from the park instead. Lucien Greaves is the co-founder of the Satanic Temple, and he joins us tonight. Lucien, thanks for joining us. I don't know much about Satanism. What are the 5 pillars of Satanism? What is it?
We have 7 tenets, actually, and actually they're irrelevant to our claim to be allowed in the free speech zone.
Well, the relevance your claim to be wait, slow down. The relevance your claim to be a religion, and so I just give us a sense of what it is.
Actually, us being a religion has no bearing on us having our claim to the free speech zone either.
But you do claim to be a religion. I just want to know what it is. Is it the worship of Satan?
No, we're actually non-theistic, and modern Satanism has been recognized as non-theistic for some time now. There are actually scholars of modern Satanism. There's books about new religion that cover Satanism. But as I said, it really has no bearing on our claim to access to the free speech zone.
I guess the reason I'm pressing you on this is because I sort of know a fake media story when I see one, and the whole Satanism thing seems like that. And I'm trying to take you seriously because I take religious people seriously, all of them. But this seems like a way to just kind of give the finger to everyone else. I mean, there are probably not a lot of Satanists in this town of 6,600 in Minnesota, are there?
Well, there are some, and there are veterans. There's a good deal of veterans within our ranks. We have about 100,000 members, many veterans, and there are veterans who don't identify with us who still stood up for our right to speak, and we find that very often when we ask for equal access in the open forum. It's usually veterans who come forward and speak in our defense, and they say these values of free speech and pluralism are the values that they fought for.
Amen, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, hence your appearance tonight. I think people should have a right to speak, but also they should have to answer questions. And the right to speak and the right to sort of give the finger to the residents of this little town in Minnesota, not exactly.
That was not what we were doing. The monument, if you no, of course it is not. So if you look at the monument, it's very respectful, it's reverent, it's a very sober, simple monument, really, and it encourages.
It's a monument to what?
To veterans. This was first and foremost something to honor the veterans who have fought and served. All veterans. Not all veterans are Christian. Not all veterans are Satanist. But they did fight for pluralism and they did fight for free speech. And to that end, it's nice to know that we can preserve those values. When they shut down the open forum, we weren't actually celebrating that. We built this monument. We were ready to install it. We wanted to put it there. And it seemed like the residents of Belle Plaine weren't entirely up in arms about this. Some of the word we got back said people thought our monument design wasn't anything to complain about. The protesters from a Catholic organization, they also were out of state. And we get this stuff about a small town and beating up on a small town, but there's no regional boundaries on free speech.
Really, I don't know, try it in downtown Birmingham, Alabama, or Chicago or something. But I mean, look, here's the point I'm making, is that there's no comparison between Satanism, which is like a silly made-up religion which has no God, even non-theistic as you conceded, and Christianity or Judaism or Islam, which you agree or disagree, believe or not, but they're millennia old. They run hospitals, churches, schools. They form the basis of our civil society. They don't really compare to what you're doing, do they?
Well, we're getting there. We're a very growing population, and we should defend pluralism and free speech. We can't allow America to divide itself into regional theocracies. Imagine a place like Clearwater, Florida, which is almost entirely colonized by Scientologists. Are they going to shut down the open forum for only veneration of L. Ron Hubbard, or introduce Dianetics as compulsory in their schools? And imagine the civil war that would ensue if Muslims
I agree with your point strongly, that people ought to be allowed to express divergent views in public. I just don't want to be sucked into the trap of having to take seriously what is clearly not a serious thing. Do you know what I mean? So it's one thing for me to agree with you and say, yeah, we're both for free speech, but this
if we weren't being serious, I would understand what you're saying. I think if you learn anything about the Satanic Temple, you'll see that we must be serious. We can't have these types of numbers. We have chapters internationally. We're quickly growing.
I don't believe your numbers for a second. And I mean, I don't. What is that even? So, like on
you don't have to.
Well, I don't believe the numbers of any group that comes on the show. I always divide by 10, and that's probably an overstatement for any group, but especially yours. But before we go, just tell us.
Okay, so what if it were 2? So what if it were 2?
The principle would
we
be this.
still
The
have
principle,
equal access to
yes,
the
you
open
would.
forum.
You would have the right to say what you think if it was just you, and I would be willing to defend that right. But again, the point of calling this Satanism is to horrify, like, normal people in the middle of the country. That is exactly the point.
That's not true. No,
Okay.
no, that is not exactly.
So what is the point? Just
and
to sum
I
it
will
up for
argue
me.
that point.
I'll give you 30 seconds. What's the point of Satanism?
Well, to sum up a religious movement and its history in 30 seconds isn't quite fair, but I would say that.
Okay.
But I would say that Satanism embodies Enlightenment values. It is emblematic of the ultimate rebellion against tyranny. To that end, we look at the history of the crushing of the church and the rise of Enlightenment values and the rise of pluralism and diversity and multiculturalism as inherently satanic.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is you're taking a Christian symbol, Satan, and using it against Christians. I mean, that's kind of the point, because you could have chosen sort of anything to name this group, since it's basically new, and you didn't. You chose the one thing that Christians hate the most. So again, it's
because
by its
Satanism
nature.
means something to us. It's not an arbitrary label.
Right. I wish you were more
I think you could
straightforward
really
with
get
that.
into it.
Yeah, probably not. Lucien, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right now, she's just a congresswoman from California. Maxine Waters, though, may have her eyes on the presidency. She was just in an early primary state. She is the toast of MSNBC. You could be voting for her in the primaries in 3 years. You ready for that? Plus, more on the parole of O.J. Simpson. We'll talk to law professor Alan Dershowitz, who was part of his defense team 22 years ago. We'll ask, are you proud of that? Stay tuned. Could 2020 be the year of Queen Maxine? California Congresswoman Maxine Waters is a champion of the anti-Trump movement, Los Angeles rioters, and now this Sunday she's paying a visit to the Granite State, New Hampshire. That can only mean one thing, of course, given that it's a long way from her district. She's running for president.
Certainly the inauguration is a way of welcoming in someone to the presidency and honoring them and respecting them. I don't honor him, I don't respect him, and I don't want to be involved with it. And so I'm questioning the patriotism of all of those Republicans who are allowing this president to side with Putin.
I think that Jeff Sessions is very dangerous. I think he's a racist.
This is a bunch of scumbags. That's what they are. This is going to put us a little bit further on our way to what I've been calling for so long, and that is impeachment.
Larry Elder is a radio show host in Los Angeles, a proud son of that city. He knows Maxine Waters, and he joins us now for a preview of her presidential campaign. Larry, it's great to see you. Why should, I mean, is it fair to assume if she's going to New Hampshire, all the way from Hancock Park, where she lives in L.A., that she's thinking about running for president?
Well, if she runs, she may have a few problems. Of the 535 lawmakers on D.C., Tucker, she's the only one, to my knowledge, who's written a letter to Fidel Castro urging him not to send back a woman who murdered a New Jersey state trooper, escaped, fled to Cuba. Congress passed a resolution urging Castro to return her. She wrote a letter to Castro. The woman who escaped is a former Black Panther. She likened her to a freedom fighter, accused her of being a victim of the criminal justice system, and urged Castro not to return her to America. The woman, Joanne Chesimard, remains at the top of New Jersey's most wanted list, and Maxine Waters urged Castro not to send her back. That's point one. Second one is she falsely accused the CIA of basically fomenting the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s and the 90s in the inner city. A argument that's been debunked by the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the LA Times. And of course, she had a meeting with the then Secretary of Treasury, urging him during the financial meltdown to bail out minority-owned banks without informing him that she and her husband had a financial interest in one of said minority banks, for which she was investigated by the House for ethics violation, played the race card. The violation, therefore, went supernova. It is one of the reasons, Tucker, why one of the left-wing groups, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics, constantly labels her as one of the most corrupt politicians in Washington, D.C.
Well, I can't speak to that, because I'm not an investigator, but she's certainly good with money, because she's been in office for 40 years, I think continuously, 40 years this year, and yet she lives in a $4.5 million house in one of the richest, one of the nicest neighborhoods in LA.
She's a shrewd stock investor.
But how does she do that? Like, what do you know the answer? Is it magic? I mean, how can I do something like that?
I'll just give you the Harry Truman answer. When you go into politics poor and you come out rich, you're stealing. And Tucker, we haven't even talked about that. We haven't even talked about her left-wing views, and they're no different than Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Nancy Pelosi, but she champions herself, Maxine Waters does, as a champion of the inner city. So her policies for inner-city black and brown people are particularly corrosive. I know. One of which, of course, is her opposition to vouchers. I went to a high school in the inner city, Tucker, called Crenshaw. If you saw the movie Boys in the Hood, that's my high school. Right now, 3% of the kids at that school can do math at grade level. But if you live across the street, you are mandated to send your kid to that school. Republicans want to give that person across the street a choice to say hell no. Democrats want that person to send their child to that school no matter what. That alone is a reason that people ought to reconsider Maxine Waters, and black people in particular ought to reconsider their allegiance to people like Maxine Waters that are doing a great deal of damage to the inner city.
And if she runs for president, I hope you will be our Maxine Waters correspondent from LA. Larry, great to see you
tonight. She will not get my vote. She won't get my vote.
Yeah, but you can cover her for us. You'll be our man on the scene. I would love that. Thank you. Larry Elder.
You got it.
Great to see you. Alan Dershowitz assisted O.J. Simpson's defense team in his trial 22 years ago. He'll be back after the break to tell us how he feels about having done that. And the president's remarks about Jeff Sessions. We'll assess those too. Stay tuned.
Mr. Simpson, I do vote to grant parole when eligible, and that will conclude this hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
O.J. Simpson is going free. The former NFL star was granted parole today in the state of Nevada after 9 years in prison for armed robbery and kidnapping. Alan Dershowitz is a Harvard law professor and served on Simpson's defense team during his murder trial more than 20 years ago. Professor, thanks for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
What would you say to O.J. Now that he's free?
Stay out of the public, live a private life. What I told Klaus von Bülow 30 years ago when I helped get him acquitted in a very controversial case, the public doesn't want you, they want to exploit you. You have to live a life of quiet desperation. Most Americans think you did it. And you can go back to your family, but if you start writing books and going on television, it's going to just stir up controversy, it's going to stir you up, and you'll probably get in trouble again, but he probably won't listen to me.
Well, he did do it, didn't he? He did murder those two people.
Well, as you know, a lawyer is not able to disclose private views. When Benjamin Netanyahu was elected Prime Minister of Israel, he called me in and said, I have a question. I thought it would be about Palestine or Iran. He said, did O.J. do it? And I said, Mr. Prime Minister, does Israel have nuclear weapons? And he said, well, you know I can't tell you that. And I said, Mr. Prime Minister, you know I can't tell you that.
Right. But the answer in both cases is the same, I have the feeling. So what about the I mean, looking back after all these years, and I actually don't think you were at the center of this part of the defense, but part of the defense was white racism was the problem here. And I wonder if you think that defense took a toll on the country in that it divided people, made them mad at each other. It was, of course, untrue anyway, but was there a social cost attached to making that defense?
Well, the decision to bring the trial downtown was a decision made by the Los Angeles DA, and that guaranteed a predominantly black jury. He could have brought the trial in a predominantly white area, and then Marsha Clark decided she would benefit from having 9 black women on the jury. Our theory was that black jurors would be more receptive to claims that the police tampered with evidence and abused the rights of Mr. Simpson. So, of course, race played a role, but if anything, it reflected the deep racial divisions in the country rather than contributing to them. It may have contributed somewhat, but as defense lawyers, we have a role to play. We have to consider only the interests of justice for our client, and so everything I did in the case I'm proud of. I was primarily what O.J. called the God forbid lawyer, the appeals lawyer in case he lost, but I also helped plan the strategy, particularly the scientific strategy, and we made a decision not to put him on the witness stand. And if you saw him today, you'd realize why it was a wise decision. He would not have been a good witness, and if the prosecution had made some wise decisions, if they hadn't put Furman on the stand, if they hadn't tried the glove on in front of the jury, they could have tried it on without the jury to see if it fit. We didn't win the case, they lost the case. And so if you want to blame somebody for what you believe is an injustice, the blame goes primarily to the prosecutors.
Well, first of all, blame the jury. They're the ones who made the decisions. But I know you can't say what you think of your former client's guilt or innocence, but what was your gut response when you saw him acquitted?
I thought there'd probably be a hung jury. I didn't think there'd be a conviction. I was surprised that you could get any unanimity in the face of the divisions and of the scientific evidence. I was fairly confident there'd be no conviction, but I also thought there'd be no acquittal. I was surprised.
So just to a totally different topic, but I know you've been following carefully the Russia investigation, the independent counsel, and so I can't resist asking your opinion on something the president said last night to the New York Times about his attorney general, and he said, if I'd known he was going to recuse himself, I wouldn't have hired him. Do you think the attorney general had to, as a legal matter, recuse himself from the Russia investigation?
There's no legal requirement to recuse, but there is an ethical requirement to recuse. Remember, presidents and attorneys general often have a very tense relationship.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton had an extremely tense relationship with Janet Reno. I'm sure he wished he hadn't hired her. She appointed an independent counsel to investigate him. So I'm not surprised at President Trump's views. I think he would have been better off expressing them in private, not in public, as Bill Clinton didn't express them in public.
Makes sense. Professor Dershowitz, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back.
COPD makes...
This is a Fox News alert. Earlier this evening, CIA Direct Officer. Let's bring in Fox News' Ed Henry for more on this story. Ed.
Dana, good to see you. A dramatic development tonight. This is happening at the Aspen Security Forum. This is an annual event out in Colorado where every summer these various security officials, military leaders get together and talk about the top issues of the day. Russian interference, by the way, in the last presidential election was also a major topic. We'll get into that because Rich Pompeo, the CIA director, also got frustrated by a series of questions from reporters and panelists about that. But what he was particularly angry about, the president and CIA director, is the fact that the New York Times back in early June published an account of the new chief of Iran operations at the Central Intelligence Agency. And they basically named this official even though he's a clandestine official and his identity is supposed to be secret. The CIA director teed off on the New York Times for publishing his name.
We had a publication, you work for it, Brett, that published the name of an undercover officer at the Central Intelligence Agency. I find that unconscionable.
Now, Fox News is also withholding the identity of this CIA official because the New York Times, in their own account in June, did say he was still working as a clandestine official. They noted that officials who commented on the identity of this person who's running Iran operations at the CIA spoke on the condition of anonymity because he is still working on a clandestine basis, and this could obviously put his life in jeopardy if the Iranians figure it out, if other officials around the world figure it out. The New York Times, by the way, in their June account, justified publishing the name by saying, number one, his identity had been previously named in other news accounts, and they also fell back on the notion that since he's running Iran operations for President Trump, who is pushing a more muscular approach towards Tehran, it justified the New York Times publishing, at least in their eyes, the name of this clandestine official because they wanted to tell the public about the Trump administration's approach to Iran and how it was going to be more aggressive than the Obama administration and potentially even included attempts to overthrow the Iranian government. So this is a dramatic development tonight that the CIA director is saying that this could have put this official in jeopardy and that the name never should have been published, Dana.